Sounds good.
All right, well, I'll kick us off. So glad, everybody, that you've come to join us tonight. This is our second talk in our clinical trial readiness series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about your data, what we know today. And we'll be hearing from Brad Bryan, who is our Director of Operations, and Megan Wright, our Parent Liaison. Take it away, you guys.
All right, I made a mistake and I put these surveys in before you all joined. So thank you for letting me know. I'm going to copy this next one really quick and then I will get started. Okay. So the first one is if you have an interest in future clinical trials. The second is if you have an interest in attending our next family conference. So if you don't mind to complete those as you're able to. But hello, everyone. I'm Megan. I'm sure I've spoken with each of you at least once, probably some of you many, many times. So I am a KCNT1 parent. This is me and my daughter Lexi, and this is at our family conference this last summer. So Lexi is 6.5 years old. And I am going to talk about how our community has grown. I know that some of us here were diagnosed long before Lexi was, and some are much newer to our community. But I want to focus on how we've grown socially by connecting as a community, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Just by verifying the members of our Facebook group, which I'm sure you're all aware of. I had spoken about that on Facebook several times this summer. We were able to nearly double the total number of patients in our family database, which is so exciting. Previously, the members in our family contact list were the only patients accounted for in regard to having KCNT1. We were able to reach out to KCNT1 families who'd not completed the contact list and get their information and get them into our database. And we grew our numbers greatly. We're just under 600 now, which is very exciting for our small community to be growing like that. Another thing we've done is demonstrate the spectrum of disease in KCNT1, and I'll get into that in just a moment. And I would like to share, I think just not too long ago, I had shared that we were just over 50 countries. We are up to 56 countries around the world, which is great representation for our community. We can go to the next slide. So just through sharing our stories, building community with one another socially and in our Facebook group, we have demonstrated a true spectrum of disease in KCNT1 epilepsy. And what we have found over the last several years is that there are actually many children who appear to lie somewhere between the two main phenotypes, which is MMPSI or EIMFS and ADNFLE or ADSHE. A lot of our kids are somewhere kind of seemingly in the middle. We have found a lot of children who maybe their seizures were not observed in early infancy, but once their seizures begin, severe developmental delay or encephalopathy occurs. And that is not reflective of traditionally ADNFLE. Well, we've also found that sometimes KCNT1 kids have seizures that are observed really early in their infancy, and it's expected that they're going to have something like MMPSI or EIMFS. And what we find is that over time, that child is actually able to reach some developmental milestones that are not indicative of EIMFS or MMPSI. And so as a whole, it leads us to wonder, is this maybe eventually going to lead to some sort of new diagnosis of a DEE within KCNT1. And that might be where the majority of our kids lie. We can go to the next slide. So, one thing that we've really learned by connecting is common threads throughout the KCNT1 spectrum. These are symptoms that apply to ADNFLE kids, they apply to MMPSI kids, and they apply to a lot of kids that lie somewhere in the middle. These are symptoms such as sleeplessness, restlessness, a circadian rhythm disorder where they are sleeping during the day and they're up all night long. This is something that's really common in all of our children. Compromised swallow and chest infections is something that some of our lesser affected population, we've started to learn that they are also dealing with those things. Some of the ADNFLE and ADSHE population have found on EEGs that they have migrating seizures that reflect the seizures that are occurring in the MMPSI or EIMFS group. Some of our lesser affected children are having neurogenic fevers. They're having poor temperature regulation. Traditionally, we used to only think that that applied to our more severely affected kids. We find across the entire spectrum that for the most part, there is seizure relief during times of illness and fevers. I know personally that that is not like 100% foolproof. That is not the case with my daughter, but that is the case with the majority of KCNT1 kids. And so we have really learned that there is much more that ties us together across this spectrum of KCNT1 than separates us. And so it's really interesting to think what additional common threads are we going to discover as we continue to build this community and we continue to share our stories with each other. I wanted to include this little fun statistic of the ages within our community. Our oldest KCNT1 warrior is 50 years old, which I think is incredible. We have now, and this is not out of our, so these are patients that we know their age. And we don't know everyone's age. So these are just KCNT1 patients whose age we are aware of. But we have roughly 16 who are somewhere above the age of 18. We have just under 30 who are between 10 and 17, and just under 40 who are 5 years or younger. The median age in our community is 7 years old. That to me is a very exciting statistic to share. I know that for many of us, including myself, that when our children were diagnosed, we did not expect that we would see them reach maybe even their first birthday for a lot of our families, or their fifth birthday. Are they going to reach age 5? Well, the median age in our community is 7 years old, which I think is really exciting and very promising for the future for our kids. So we broke down by the United States, and then I'll get to our international population next. But in the United States, we have 42 states that we have identified a living patient, or we have a bereaved family in that state. There are only 8 states that we do not know of a KCNT1 warrior ever having been identified in. Our largest populations by state, California takes number 1. They have 25. They currently have 22 who are living. Florida, Texas, and North Carolina come next. They have somewhere between 12 and 14. And then Ohio and Michigan are 9 and 10. And then after that, the average is somewhere between 3 and 4 for each state. But I have a list here towards the bottom of states that we have 1 patient identified in each of these states. So I think this is interesting statistics. it's my impression that there probably is a KCNT1 kid living in each of those 8 states, and we just aren't aware of them yet. But I think this is fun to see, and to see kind of where we're located. And maybe you're in a state and you see, oh, we're the only ones for now. Or you're in California and you realize that you're surrounded. And here's a graph. So this just shows by state. You can see, we can take a moment and you can look and find your state if you're in the US, of how many are living there. We have, it seems like between 3 and 5 is kind of the average for most states. And then our international population, some of our largest international populations are in Brazil, China, the UK, France, and Germany. And we have 23 countries that we have only identified one patient in each of those countries. And these are all the other countries that we have somebody identified to us living there. So we are expecting that our community will continue to grow over the next couple of years. Currently, we have an approximate ratio of 3 to 1 of EIMFS patients to ADSHE patients. In this EIMFS, we're also including the EIEE or EOEE or infantile spasms, DEE, which is developmental and epileptic encephalopathy. EOEE is early onset epileptic encephalopathy. So those are your severe phenotypes. So we have about 3 severely affected children for every 1 mild to moderately affected child. However, we don't expect that this is an accurate representation for our community. And that is because of delays and barriers that inhibit the epilepsy diagnosis and or the genetic testing for our lesser affected population. One thing that you hear a lot when speaking with our lesser affected families is that their diagnosis for epilepsy took a long time, or they were diagnosed with epilepsy for quite a while, thinking it was all going to get better before they even sent out for genetic testing. So as ADNFLE and ADSHE families come to us, usually they've been dealing with epilepsy for a little while longer than our EIMFS and MMPSI families have. So we expect that the additional patients out of the currently living population in the world that we're going to be finding are going to be the patients who are lesser affected, the ones who have AD and FLE. Of course, as new children are born and are severely affected, they're going to come to us. But speaking of just out of patients who are out there waiting to be identified or brought to our community, we expect the majority of those will be the AD and FLE population. And so this ratio might change over time. Right now, it's just kind of what we perceive at this time. So I gave you a lot of statistics, and I thought some of that was just fun information. Some of it was encouraging information. But what I want to share with you is that all of this information that I just presented was information that was found through our social groups. So it is either information from our Facebook page or it is information from our family contact list. That means that that information is staying where it's at. If it was shared in our Facebook group, then that's where it lives, and it's not being shared with scientists and researchers who are trying to find a treatment for our children. These are what they're missing out on is the spectrum of disease. They're missing out on the range of symptoms. They're missing out on the common threads, realizing that some of these symptoms that are assumed to only be affecting our very severely affected population are actually affecting a lot of our kids. They don't know that because only we know that in our community because it's not been shared. Um, and those researching a treatment for KCNT1 will only ever know what we share with them. Our children's symptoms and their disease pattern can really only be observed in our children themselves. And without enrolling in Citizen, your child's story is going untold. Their symptoms are not being researched, and we are not sharing, what this is doing to our kids and what it's doing to our families, to us as parents. They are not aware of that. And so this is kind of my pitch to sign up for Citizen. Enrolling in Citizen is a very low stress, low commitment task with a big, big, big reward. Signing up for Citizen takes a few minutes, less than 10, somewhere between 5 and 10. And you sign up, and then eventually when they get around to it, the hospital is going to give you a call and say, hey, I got this request from Citizen asking for your information. Do you consent? And you say, yes, I do. And they say, thanks, have a great day, bye. And that's it. That is truly it. I get a phone call about once every 6 months that says, hey, do you still consent? And I say, yes, I do. And we're done. You update doctors as you have doctor changes, but these are really very small tasks that have a huge reward for our community and for your child. So right now, Citizen is for our US families. So if you are an international family, hopefully we'll have something before too long. But for now, if you are a US family and you would consider signing up for Citizen, it would be wonderful for our community if you would think about doing so. And yes, what Ali said, email me. I'm happy to talk it through with you. I'm happy to help you. I'm happy to answer questions that I might be able to answer, or give you kind of my perspective on it as a parent. So hopefully you'll consider enrolling in Citizen, because all this information I've shared with you is information that we know in our community, and it's not out there. It is not being shared with those who are researching a treatment for our kids. So I will pass it over to Brad.
Hey, thanks, Megan, for that awesome overview of the outreach efforts that you've done. She's doing an amazing job at the foundation with increasing the size of the community. We wouldn't have any reach in the community that we have today without her efforts. So she's totally right. It's only through finding as many people as we can and getting them to participate in studies like we'll be talking about today, that we can really understand those clinical features and the progression and ultimately the treatment of the disease, of the condition. And so I hope if you haven't participated in things like Citizen or the research opportunities, or the registry that Megan hinted at that will be coming out soon, I hope you do, because really, unless it's published, unless scientists have their hands on the data, it exists in the community and it exists in a vacuum. And it's really, how can we recruit more scientists to work on a condition if they don't know about it? And so I'll kick this off from my side of things, just to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Brad Bryan. It's a PhD doctor, not an MD doctor. So, hold the clinical questions and I can answer all the sciencey ones. But I'm Director of Operations for the foundation. It's a pleasure to speak with everybody today and tonight. And I'm going to take a dive into two studies that a lot of the KCNT families, hopefully some that are on this call, participated in and provided their information for. And if you haven't provided this information, hopefully it'll inspire you to do so, and you can see why this is so important. Both of the two studies are patient registry studies, and they collect and track health information from KCNT1 families over time. And the data provides insight into disease progression and treatment outcomes and patient experiences. And that data helps us understand the natural course of the condition and improve our clinical decision making. The studies are important because, like Megan said, there's really a dearth of information published in the scientific literature on what KCNT patients look like, really at a high level and in large numbers. And it takes that information, not just as a community, but in the scientific literature to engage those researchers so they can effectively study the condition. I'm excited to say that both of the analyses of the studies that we'll be talking about tonight were accepted for presentation at December's American Epilepsy Society annual meeting in Los Angeles. Woohoo! And we're currently writing a scientific manuscript for publication of these findings. So if you were a family member that took part in these studies, give yourself a round of applause there, because we're going to actually publish that data and scientists can see it and the world can see it, and we can help guide clinical decision making from that. One of the registries, the KCNT1 Epilepsy Foundation's original registry, we have the demographic information here. So this is really some high-level demographic information. There were 69 families or participants that participated in this, and they were from all across the globe. So it was really cool. Citizen is really heavily focused on the U.S., but when we did our internal registry, we captured people from all over the globe, and you can see the geography of that here. It's interesting, the median age of the patients at the time of the data input was about 4 years old. And the first symptoms they saw was a median around 1 month, and they were first diagnosed around 4 months. So on average, they were pretty quickly diagnosed. But there's a lot of variability in all these times. So if you look at those deviations, there's a lot of deviation in the data. So, some people weren't diagnosed early. Some people didn't see their first symptom early. So there's a whole lot of variability in this data. This is some really high-level data we have from the Citizen Registry that we've been talking about. We've got 49 families that participated at the time that we did the analysis. I think we've got some more now, and we're really trying to hit 100 by the end of November if we can. Here, median age of diagnosis is around 3 months, and that's pretty close to what we saw with our other registry. The data that you're going to see tonight really are representative of the subtypes found in patients with KCNT1 related conditions. We have representation of the different subtypes, but you can see from our data that some of the less common subtypes are infrequently represented. So this is a call out that we need more and more families and their information in those registries, and that helps our researchers better understand those less common subtypes. In this, we collected genetic testing report data from both registries, both our internal registry and the Citizen Health Registry. And the distribution of the most common variants is pretty similar in both studies. There's about 4 or 5 genetic variants that make up about or over half of the variants reported. And there's a whole lot of less commonly represented variants that compose the other half. We need, if we can get larger numbers of people, of families in these registries, then we can actually start stratifying those variants and saying, hey, this variant looks like this, or this variant looks like this. And that's like our gold standard, or what we're really trying to do. Right now, the numbers might be a little bit low for us to confidently do that. But if we can get more numbers in there, then it would be really outstanding if we could do that. So overwhelmingly, patients with KCNT1 variants had their first symptoms within the first year of life. And we see most seeing their first symptom before 3 months of age. So that's really early on. There was a smaller subset that saw their first symptoms after 1 year of age, and a very few seeing their first symptoms at 8 to 12 years of age. And those symptoms could be seizures. It could be developmental delays. There's a wide range of what is considered a first symptom in this. And over the course of the study, the participants in the study had a large number of clinical diagnoses in addition to just their general KCNT1 diagnosis. The most common of those diagnoses are neurological, respiratory, and gastrointestinal processes. But there's additional issues that arose across a large number of organ systems. So this is not a condition that affects just a single biological system. It seems to have fairly systemic effects across a lot of different systems. So it's really multifactorial. And it's not just a neurologist that would be treating one of these kiddos. It's going to be a team of clinicians really to effectively treat them with this wide variety of diagnoses. So this is a look at the diagnosis, at the level of each patient. So how to look at this graph, it's a lot of colors and a lot of lines, but kind of to help you understand this, because I'll be showing more graphs like this as we go through. Each patient in the study is represented by a single horizontal bar in the graph. So each of those lines going across is one patient. There's a lot of horizontal bars, so there's a lot of patients in the study. And what you see here is that for all the KCNT1 participants in the study, there wasn't just a single diagnosis in a single organ or tissue. So it's not like they just had a neurological diagnosis or they just had a respiratory diagnosis. In every patient, the variant affected multiple aspects of the physiology, and those range from neurological to skeletal to immunological down to dental and dermatology. So there were a lot of different physiological processes that were affected by these variants. And here's a representative sample of some of the systems level diagnosis that the participants in the study experience. And the most common phenotypes are listed under each of those organ systems. And is shown in the image and in the two previous graphs as well, there's a lot of multi-system dysfunctions that occur in participants that had in these studies that had KCNT1 variants. And like I said, in the literature, there's not really a high-level overview of what this looks like from sort of a global standpoint. And so it's really important for researchers to be able to see this and say, oh, hey, I study metabolism in DEEs, or I study metabolism in neurological conditions. This might be a really cool condition that I can study and actually make an impact on. So it's really good to not just focus on the seizures, which are the main thing that everybody focuses on, but look at everything and say, how can we pull in a lot of different researchers on a lot of different areas and learn a lot more about this. There's a lot of procedures, if you guys are parents, I'm certain you're aware of this, but here you see a lot of the summation of all the diagnostic tests that are performed across this group of participants. The participants with the variants underwent a huge number of diagnostic procedures, both to help identify the condition and various issues that arose post-diagnosis. And overwhelmingly, EEGs and ECGs are the most common diagnostic tests. And imaging was, a major constituent of the diagnostic tests across the board. Similarly, with what you see in different organ systems that are affected by KCNT1 variants, due to these various medical diagnoses, each patient with the KCNT1 variant underwent oftentimes a really large number and a variety of diagnostic tests. We'll delve a little bit into therapeutic procedures and medicines, medical interventions. There were a number of therapeutic procedures performed on the participants in their standard care. Most common was nerve muscle block, and most of this was Botox. And with feeding tubes coming in a close second, there were a large variety of therapeutic procedures that were performed in addition to those, and they range from ketogenic diet, which we'll talk a little bit about here in a little bit, to nerve stimulators, to a lot of different types of surgical procedures. On a patient-by-patient basis, there was definitely less variety of therapeutic procedures performed than for our other categories like clinical diagnosis or diagnostic tests. But it is worth noticing or noting that 84% of the participants in the study had some form of a feeding tube. So, a huge majority, and nearly 40% of them had some form of nerve or muscle block. There's a large number of assistance devices used by this group of participants, and there's a really big emphasis on posture and movement support. And to a lesser amount, but still mention worthy, there was, communication devices were used as assistants. As you can see in all the cases, patients with the KCNT1 variant had more than one assistant devices with orthosis devices, which those are like support devices. Think of them like braces, like a brace to help align a part of a body, being the most common. This was really interesting. There was a lot of prescriptions written to this group of participants. You can see the different classes of prescriptions on this graph and the number of times they were given on the y-axis of the graph. When I talk about number of times, I want you to know that there were so many prescriptions written for anticonvulsants, so anti-seizure medications, that I had to put the y-axis on a logarithmic scale, so it isn't linear. As you can see, the graduations go from 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000. And the anticonvulsants, why that may not look like much bigger than the next column, the column next to it. It's a enormous scale larger. So in addition to anti-seizure medications, patients were prescribed a lot of nutritional supplements, heart medications, which I suspect may have been also used as anti-seizure medications, drugs for gastric reflux, that came up quite a lot. And then cannabinoids is also probably anti-seizure as well. And this was really interesting information as well. Each participant in the study had a lot of prescriptions from a broad array of anti-seizure medications. And though you can't see it on the graph here, many of the patients were actually taking multiple anti-seizure medications at the same time. And there's a lot of switching to different anti-seizure medications. So to me, that suggests that the seizures experienced by KCNT1 patients were refractory to treatment. And it really emphasizes the struggles that families probably face with the seizure control because there's so much switching going on. Let's see, the font may be a little bit difficult to see on this graph because there's a lot of anticonvulsants or anti-seizure medications that are shown here, but the most prescribed of these is phenobarbital. That overwhelmingly. There's quite a number of other ones, but really the major anti-seizure medications. There's you can see there to the left. I'm going to skip that really quick and go here. This is a really interesting piece of data. So this is parent caregiver self-reported effectiveness of anti-seizure medications. And really it's the parents and caregivers, they ranked different type of anti-seizure treatments based on their effectiveness. So, it's a little bit relative because we're not using defined outcome measures as to what they would consider effective, but in their opinion, they rank these as effective. And what's really interesting is the most effective anti-seizure treatment that parents ranked as effective is the keto diet. So even more so than a lot of the anti-seizure medications. But it was followed by clobazam and phenobarbital and quite a number of other treatments. I think there's some trends that you can see in the data here. It looks like a lot of the anti-seizure medications have been, self-reported to be effective. But given the number of anti-seizure medications that patients are, as shown on the previous slide, self-reported effectiveness may be relative. It may not, it may not be as good as we'd like it to be. Also, many of the treatments have considerable side effects, so parents are probably carefully weighing the benefits versus the risk of many of these treatments. And finally, we examined the number and reason for hospital admissions in KCNT1 participants, and overwhelmingly seizures were the main reasons for hospitalizations. And that was followed by respiratory complications and planned activities. And planned activities would mean things like planned surgeries or medical interventions or rehabilitation or other reasons. And much like we've shown in previous graphs on a patient-by-patient view, we see that there's a lot of hospitalizations for each patient. 100% of the patients in the study were admitted to the hospital for seizures at one point. And there's repeated visits for the overwhelming majority of the patients. Close to all the participants in the study were admitted to the hospital for respiratory complications as well. So much like, medications, diagnosis, and other aspects of the condition that I showed before, there's really a multifactorial hospital admissions that the families face for a lot of different reasons. So this was, really a high-level overview of some of the data we've got. We've got a ton of data from these different studies. And, I appreciate your attention, your interest in the presentation. And, all of what we covered today was focused on the individual with the KCNT1 variant. We also have a large amount of information from the parents and caregivers as well. So we have information on impacts to the family, willingness to participate in clinical trials, and a lot of leading parental concerns. We're going to be hosting a lot of these talks over the remainder of the year, so we can start to share that data with you as well as we go along. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, and Megan mentioned as well, this kind of data on KCNT1 as a condition, it isn't available in this kind of detail in the scientific literature. This information has to come out of the community and become public for researchers to understand it and see it from a high level that they can start tackling. So it's only really through families like you that take time to take part in these studies that make it possible and shed light on the disorders, and it allows researchers to build on the data and hopefully eventually come up with treatments. So I strongly encourage you to participate in the citizen registry, in an upcoming registry that we will be, this is sort of our teaser, but that we will be launching in the next in several months. You'll find the link to the citizen registry in the last bullet on this slide. If we can build up enough numbers in the registry, we can do a whole lot more than what you saw here. And, I hope to see the numbers in this registry increase after this presentation. And maybe we can give the presentation again in a year and we'll have a lot more insights into KCNT1. And then finally, I'm giving you a sneak peek here at some of the ways in the very near future that you can help drive KCNT1 research forward. Like I said, we're planning on launching our own registry in the upcoming months. And really exciting news, we plan on participating in a biomarker study or multiple biomarker studies to help identify circulating markers of KCNT1. We'll be carrying out over the next year, probably next half a year or so, a nationwide blood collection campaign to help support that study. So keep checking your emails, keep reading the newsletter, and you'll hear more about this coming up. And for now, thank you for all your attention, taking the time out of your day, whatever time zone you may be in, to listen, and open the floor to any questions you may have for Megan or me or anybody else on the call. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Megan. Do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can see everyone's faces? And if everyone wants to turn on their camera,